Um, so I am I'm Margaret Williams. Hi Beth, what's up, girl? I've been meaning to reach out to you. You've been on fire out there, girl. Yes, we need to talk, girl. Yes, I'm with you. All right. I don't care where you at. Yes, yes. Keeping on. Okay. So I'm so honored to have JonRobert uh Tartaglione.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah.
Okay, PhD. So I'm sorry to butcher your name. Okay,
No,
but
it's
you're
good.
gonna you're gonna fix that. So John here, he's the founder and principal consultant at Influence 51. Okay, behavioral scientist. Okay, something we all want and need in our lives. Okay, and we had a very a heartfelt conversation over Zoom, okay? And so, John here, what we're going to be talking about today is the physics of persuasion, okay? And so through research-backed principles of influence framed through the laws of motion. And these things are so important. The laws of physics come into play in every asset aspect of our lives, okay? So Dr. John here is a behavioral scientist, speaker, and executive advisor specializing in the psychology of human influence. Okay? And as the founder of Influence 51, he translates research in social psychology and behavioral science into practical strategies for leaders, executive teams, and organizations seeking to shape attitudes, improve decision making, and drive sustainable behavioral change. Lord knows we need this throughout our entire world. Okay? So his key expertise and focus is behavioral science and influence, leadership and organizational change, keynotes and workshops. And everything else that John brings to the table, I will make sure to include in the video, in the replay video. Okay? And so right now, I would like John to introduce himself, tell us about your leadership journey and what brought you to Substack.
Sure. I appreciate the introduction, Margaret. I really do. It's great to be here, and I'm sure we're gonna have a great conversation today. For anyone who's on the call right now, my name is Dr. JonRobert Tartaglione. Everyone calls me Tat. You're welcome to call me Tat as well if you'd like. And I study something pretty simple. I study people, and more specifically, I study what moves people. So what moves people to think, behave, and decide in the way that they do, and ultimately, how can we move people to think, behave, and decide differently? And so this all comes down to a discipline which we're all familiar with, and it's called influence. But influence is this very complex, multifaceted discipline. I could not sit here and tell you everything about influence if we had 4 hours, never mind if we have 30 or 40 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever we have here today. And so ultimately, what I try to do for my clients is I try to teach them influence in the most palatable, digestible way possible. And I've kind of boiled it down to what I call the 5 principles of influence, which are the 5 principles that are most important to understand if you want to stand a better chance of changing the way someone thinks, shifting their behavior or decision making, or trying to sustainably motivate action. And so, Margaret, without further ado, happy to answer any questions that you might have and looking forward to the conversation.
Please continue.
Sure. So I got started because I was actually a philosophy major in undergrad. I wanted to be a lawyer. I went in there. I quickly realized that I actually wasn't interested in law as much as I was interested in why do we consider these things just. And so they kind of shoved me into the philosophy department. And I have to say, as much as I teased myself about being a philosophy major and how the job market's a little bit anemic for philosophy majors, I will say that philosophy teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to ask the right questions. And one of the things that I found most fascinating about philosophy was that there was a lot of different theories about human nature, about what moves us, what makes us tick. And so when I graduated and I kind of was looking for my next move, where was I passionate? Where did my passion lie? I wanted to follow those kind of philosophical musings on human nature into a discipline that looked into the empirical side of human nature. And so that's what got me into psychology. I started reading about social psychology and behavioral psychology and moral psychology and all these different domains of psychology. And I found out that there's so much of human behavior that we've learned that isn't being applied with people, with businesses, with charities and causes in a way that it could be. And so that became my mission, is how can I bring insights from psychology and behavioral science to the people that can use them most?
I love that. When we talk about philosophers, looking back at history, we have Epictetus, we have Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
So some of those that I mentioned, who were some of your greats?
That's a good question. I mean, you got to go if you're going big. I think you got to go either Socrates or Aristotle, right? I mean, Socrates was, in my mind, the ultimate badass, because Socrates was someone who was basically told that he needed to stop doing what he was doing under the threat of death, and he said, "You know what? Give me death." And Socrates, I think, to me, is one of the most monumental historical figures that I've ever personally come upon. So, big Socrates fan, I suppose I would say.
Yes, yes. And and some of the things that I think about when we talk about persuasions and some of the books that I've read, like The Art of War,
Yeah.
okay? And also Robert Greene's books. One of my favorite by him is The Art of Seduction.
Oh, okay. I haven't read it.
Yeah, but you might want to do that. And another one he has too, okay, is the 33 Strategies of War.
Interesting. Interesting.
He has like 5 or 6 different books
Yeah.
in his thing, but I don't want to get off track with our conversation, since we're
Sure.
talking about what we're talking about when we talk about persuasion. We're talking about strategies.
Hmm.
Okay, all
Hmm.
these different strategies not necessarily going to work perfectly for us.
Yeah.
Okay, and so let's talk further about persuasion.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I think before you get into persuasion, the first thing you need to understand is how the brain actually works. Because a lot of people operate under some misapprehensions about what the brain is and what it's meant to do. The human brain is not really designed for accuracy or truth. It's designed for survival, and that's kind of a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. What we mean by that, right, is a lot of people believe that the human brain operates like a computer does, that it tries to find the most accurate answer. Rather than thinking about human beings as logical creatures or perfectly rational creatures, it's more appropriate to think of human beings as rationalizing creatures. And there's a really important difference there. If human beings were perfectly rational creatures, then we would have brains that operate kind of like scientists do. They would take every piece of information available to them, they would evaluate them objectively and impartially, and try to come to the best possible answer. In reality, our brains work much more like a trial lawyer does, where what they try to do is they try to defend a position, and then they go about selecting information that allows them to defend that position as capably as possible. And so there's a very big difference between rational and rationalizing. Now, the challenge becomes, Margaret, is if you operate under this idea that the brain is this kind of perfectly logical, truth telling instrument, you're going to approach persuasion in the wrong way. You're going to think that all I need to do is give you the best possible argument I have, and I'm going to change your mind. In reality, persuasion is actually often far less about the content of our argument, and it's more about the way in which we approach individuals. For persuasion to be effective, you first need to understand that your approach matters. And the best way I can explain that is, Margaret, if you go to let's say you went to a museum and you're looking at the art and it's beautiful, you're admiring, different sculptures, and you find yourself alone in a room and you're looking at a beautiful statue and you look to the right and you notice there's a sign and the sign says, "Do not touch the art." What's the first thing you suddenly want to do?
Touch it.
You want to touch it, right? Everyone suddenly wants to touch the art. It's this irresistible feeling, but it's a feeling we all get, and it's something that has been studied by psychologists. It's called psychological reactance. Basically, when human beings feel that their autonomy is being constrained, that their freedom to choose or do as they wish is being compromised, we instinctively push back, right? And you can think of it almost as like one of those finger traps where the harder you pull, the more stuck you become. The harder you try to push someone to do something, do not touch the art, the more inclined we become to push back. I'm going to touch the art if I want to touch the art, right? It's this anti-coercion software that we have kind of built into our natures. And what's so interesting about psychological reactance is it's so powerful that you could go against your own self-interest, right? I love ice cream, but if you came by and you said, "Yeah, keep eating that ice cream right now," all of a sudden I'm not going to want to eat the ice cream anymore, right? Because I don't like being forced to do that. Psychological reactance is such an important part of understanding persuasion because it shows us that it's not just about the data you're bringing, it's not just about the argument you're making. It's about making sure that people don't feel pressured or forced. And that's the first misstep we have when we try to persuade people, is we try to think that all that matters is the argument. All that matters is the logic and the coherence of the argument. And I should be able to deliver it any way I want. But if you get people feeling like you're trying to force them to think something or force them to believe something, regardless of how logical it is, they will instinctively push back.
Let me say something before I forget.
Yeah, yeah.
Marketing use this tactic all the time. You
Yeah.
have to buy this right now to get this 20%. Okay,
Yeah.
they say, okay, they put you under pressure and you got to make a decision right now. Otherwise, down a month from now, it's going to cost you 5 times as much.
That's right.
Okay, so people, we all utilize these things because otherwise,
That's
if you
right.
don't create this sense of urgency, people will like, oh, I'll get it next time.
Yeah. That's
It's a
right. That's
slippery
right.
slope. It's a
That's right.
slippery slope.
Uh, that's correct.
So, yeah, right. So, politicians, this is the worst because every hour, it seems like every 10 minutes is something happens, something else happens,
Mm.
something else
Mm.
happens, and I can't keep track. And I'm like, you know what? Forget it. I don't care what happened at this point. There ain't a damn thing I can do about it anyway. Okay. Okay, I could be like Chicken Little. The sky's falling, the sky's
Yes.
falling. So now the sky's falling. What am I supposed to do instead?
Mm.
Okay. I
Mm.
just like forget it. Okay. I
Mm.
surrender. I got my white flag up. Y'all win. I can't keep up. Okay. They utilize the same tactics basically
Mm.
over and
Mm.
over and over and over and over. And you would think that we would see through it by now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where when some of the tactics you're talking about are things like what we would call in psychology manufactured scarcity, right? Where people say you have to do this now, you have to act on this now, or time will run out, right? And you won't be able to do it later on. And what we find is that that does tend to work in the short term on people. A lot of people are kind of influenced by these tactics in the short term, but what it does is it tends to erode trust in the long term. And so what we find is that brands and organizations that tend to overutilize these types of tactics, which can be conceived as being a little bit manipulative, right? Over the long term,
Yes.
it erodes trust. It makes people say, I don't believe you anymore. And ultimately, the tactics that once worked are now going to be diluted.
Next, what you gonna try next?
Exactly.
We have a saying back home: you can't get blood from a turnip.
There
Okay.
we go.
Okay. So you got to come up with something better because everybody coming up with some kind of scheme.
Yeah, yeah,
People probably hating on me, but whatever. I, I'm I'm I'm
yeah.
I'm included too because we all trying to get clients. We all trying to keep clients, and we all
Yeah.
trying to elevate and
Hmm.
grow. So we need to
Hmm.
understand all of these things before we open our mouth. What are you
Yeah,
saying, and what are you conveying? Okay,
yeah, yeah.
and what are you bringing to the table?
Mm,
Okay. Because
mm.
if you're just looking for a free ride or a free lunch or something, you can go somewhere else because you ain't got nothing here coming here. Okay.
Yeah,
Period.
yeah.
I'm gonna tell you
Agreed.
up front before you come. All right. Next.
I I agree, Margaret. And you know what I will say too is that I think that this is one of the big misunderstandings about persuasion, right? A lot of people hear persuasion, they hear a dirty word, and understandably so, right? Because persuasion has been misused by a lot of bad actors, you know. But I'll say two things, right? There are two things that separate persuasion from manipulation in my mind, two clear barriers. The first one is this idea of coercion, right? If you feel like you're being pressured, like someone is trying to force you to do something or make a decision that you otherwise wouldn't, right? This is an ethical violation. This is where persuasion becomes manipulation. That's kind of the first guardrail. The second guardrail for me is deception, right? It is lying or falsehoods or misinformation, you know? And this to me is also disappointing because what persuasion is ultimately is it's an art form, right? Persuasion is not about tricking someone into believing something that they otherwise wouldn't, or having to use fabricated data to kind of change someone's mind. What persuasion ultimately is it's about being able to get someone to look at the same data or the same topic from a slightly different perspective, right? To shift their perception on something so they can look at it from a different vantage point and therefore come to different conclusions about it. This is the essence of what persuasion ultimately is. It doesn't involve any coercion or deception. It's much more of an art than a science.
And if I can't take my time to make the decision, then whatever you selling or whatever you're doing is not for me. Next, move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what we have to stand by. I don't care if it could be the best thing since rain.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't care. I have to investigate. Okay. Because we
Agreed.
know everything that glitters is not gold.
Agreed.
Okay. And by the time you realize it, you've been duped. And they're like, oh, you didn't read the fine print?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So your money is gone. Ain't nothing I can do for you. Next. That's life. And we all have been duped at one point, a time or another.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. All
yeah.
right. And we've learned a lot of valuable lessons.
Mm,
Okay. And
mm.
so we just need to be mindful in the future. Okay. It is what
Yep.
it is.
I agree. I agree.
And that's why we're having this conversation today about persuasion,
Mm.
because people can talk you into a river
Yeah.
or, sell you a piece of the moon.
Mm.
Okay. If
Mm.
you're not careful, right?
That's correct.
So
Yeah.
we need to look at the tell signs, and many of the times it's just a matter of listening to what your body tells you.
Mm. Mm.
Okay. If it smell like a rat, okay, 9 times out of 10 it is a rat. And don't try to think it's something else.
Mm.
Don't let somebody tell you, oh, that's not a rat, that's a that's a cat. Don't try to, you know what I'm saying? Because people will try to convince you that it's blue outside and you know it's red.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm.
Pay attention, people. We have to wake up. So 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 let's talk more about this. about this persuasion?
Yeah, sure. So I think, Margaret, when you're dealing with individuals whom you don't see eye to eye with, I like to say that it's useful to think of another person's mind as private property. And what I mean by that is, if imagine, right, that you're in your front yard and you're gardening, and I walk by and I'm holding the most beautiful plant you've ever seen, right? But without asking your permission, I jump your fence, I run into the other side of your garden, I start digging up your dirt and trying to plant this plant. How are you going to react?
I'm gonna
You're going
think
to
you
be
crazy.
you're gonna think I'm crazy, right? You're gonna get aggressive and hostile. You're gonna say, "Get the hell off my yard, right? Get off my lawn. What are you doing on here? You weren't invited." You know. And this is why I say you need to kind of think of another person's mind as private property, because in the same way that you would get aggressive and hostile if someone were to come onto your property without your permission, so too do people become defensive when you try to change their mind before they're ready to have these types of conversations. And so, persuasion, what it ultimately is prior to getting to the content of your argument, you have to create a space. You have to create a space where someone is willing to consider an alternative perspective, where they're willing to interrogate their own beliefs and potentially critique their own beliefs, right? And these are all vulnerable things. These are things that require trust, they require respect. It requires you to create an environment where someone is open to having these conversations with you. And so before you can even get to the argument itself, it's about creating that space. And that's why I say that persuasion is not always a knowledge problem or a knowledge gap. A lot of times it's an access problem. If you don't have someone at a point where they're willing to consider an alternative standpoint. It doesn't matter how good your data is, it doesn't matter how logical your argument is. They're going to argue against it because they're in defensive mode rather than reflective mode.
Well, then in all relationships there have to be a give and take. If you being
Yeah.
defensive and I'm being defensive, then we can't come to any type of meeting of the minds. Maybe we
Mm.
have to agree to take a pause and come back,
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's
right?
healthy too, right? I think being able to take a pause and take a breath and make sure that emotions are not running too high. One of the things that people don't understand is that if you're trying, a lot of people believe that their passion is going to be their greatest asset when it comes to persuasion. Now, here's the challenge is that your passion tends to invigorate those who already share your view, right? If you
Right.
want to mobilize people who agree with you, there's nothing you can do more effective than be passionate. Go and shout it from the rooftops what you believe. But if you're trying to change the mind of someone who disagrees with you, your passion becomes polarizing, right? Your passion about your side begets passion from their side. And suddenly you're both trying to push each other in the opposite directions, right? And so here is where we need to be a little bit more surgical with how we approach things. We can't just go shouting what we believe because all you're going to get is someone shouting back at you, right? Persuasion requires a different approach, one that to a degree kind of puts passion to the side and is a bit more dispassionate, a bit more, in a way, surgical.
I love that. You may come to the conclusion that you can agree to disagree and go your
Mm.
separate ways.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's more value. Ultimately, there's a great quote by Dr. Julia Minson, where she says that a productive conversation between individuals who are disagreeing is one that ends with both parties being willing to have another conversation in the future, right? It's not necessarily that you're going to change everyone's mind, but if you can disagree in a way where someone is left thinking, I would speak to that person again, even though we don't see eye to eye, I'm willing to have another conversation with them. That's a productive disagreement.
I agree. And one thing we don't want to do is burn that bridge because,
Absolutely.
you burn the bridge and you're like, damn it, I needed to go back that way. And you can't. It's gone.
Yeah. That's right.
Because you can always negotiate, okay?
Mm.
But if you burn the bridge, you shit out of luck.
It's over. Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. That's right.
Absolutely. There's some comments here, uh,
Oh, okay.
John Robert. I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
if
yeah.
I don't know if you see them or not.
I haven't seen them. This is my first time using Substack. So this is I'm taking. I'll try to take a look, but I don't know how to use this yet.
You just I don't know if you're on your phone or if you're on
I'm
your.
on my phone right now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You might can use your finger. To
Okay, okay. I'm
pull
scrolling down
down,
a little bit.
and
I
then you
see
can
some
see.
stuff.
Yeah, I hope the marketers didn't get upset, but if they do, it's we just telling truth, okay? These are tactics been used before they were born, so
Mm,
they
mm.
needn't be upset, okay?
Yeah.
Oh, she said, been there. Signs all over. One of the first vipers at the car dealer in the States. So I did. I ran my hand across the entire vehicle and it
Do
was
not
such
touch.
a. Okay?
That's funny.
Exactly. Exactly. Because I've went to a lot of places overseas, a lot of museums, okay?
Mm,
And most
mm.
of those museums, they'll tell you, do not use the flash,
Yeah, yeah,
okay?
yeah. That's
Because
right.
it destroys, the artifact itself, and they
Mm,
tell
mm.
you do not touch. And
Yeah.
all those places, I abided by it. Okay.
Oh, that's good. That's good. You're a good patron.
Yeah, because it destroys these things, the
Mm,
artifacts,
mm.
and a lot of people, I'm gonna be honest, don't have no home training, and it's like
Yeah.
those the first ones. I'm like, look at that ignorant person over there. I just go about my business and keep moving. Okay, so you realize, when they
Mm,
say don't touch, that means don't touch. Okay,
mm,
it is what it is. Okay, so when we look at these things, okay,
mm.
persuasion,
Yeah.
um, we took look at the status quo.
Mm,
Okay. So when you look at persuasion and the status quo, many of these people, organizations, especially at the top of all of these organizations, they use persuasion to keep the status quo.
mm,
Whereas we, as marginalized leaders, we
mm,
use persuasion to break through the glass ceiling. And
mm,
there, if you're looking at the differences there, that is a conflict in itself. You want to talk
mm.
about that?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think, it's one of those things where when I work with clients, especially clients who are from marginalized communities, right? People who do not have the type of institutional or systemic power that some of the things they're going up against do. I talk about influence and persuasion as kind of their way of leveling the playing field, right? And a lot of what persuasion involves is, I'll give you a quick example, right? There's an old quote by Blaise Pascal that basically says that individuals are better persuaded by ideas that have come to their own mind than by the same ideas given to them by someone else. And what this means, right, is that we tend to be more persuaded by things that we have come up with rather than arguments that have come from others. In psychology, we call this self generated persuasion. One of the best ways to catalyze self generated persuasion is by asking questions, asking reflective questions. And so let's imagine that you're looking to create change within an organization, right? Rather than going in and saying, hey, these changes need to be made right now and kind of demanding change, which, as we've mentioned, tends to get pushback. A more effective approach is often to come in and start asking, what is happening in our organization right now that is preventing this change, right? Why haven't we changed? And ultimately, what are we losing by not changing? Because if we can lead people to the conclusions that we want them to come to, this is typically a more durable way to stimulate attitude change than giving them those conclusions by ourselves. And so self generated persuasion is one of the best kind of tools we have in our repertoire for generating change and making it feel like people weren't persuaded because ultimately they persuaded themselves.
Were you talking about reverse psychology?
not quite reverse psychology, more a different route to persuasion, right? Because the
Okay.
typical route to persuasion when people think about persuasion is convincing someone, right? That you are the instigator of change because you have convinced them of something. Now, persuasion can happen that way, but what we find in literature that is that you should look at two people in a conversation and try to think, I am not the most persuasive person in this conversation. They are. And so, what I want to do is rather than just giving them all of my arguments, I want to figure out questions I can ask to have them come to the same conclusions on their own. Because if they feel like they've arrived there by themselves, they're more likely to hold on to that opinion long term.
I totally agree with that. Sometimes the best thing is to show people, because if you talk to them,
Yeah,
then they might feel like you're saying that you're superior to them, or
exactly. That's right.
so I would prefer to show a person
Mm,
rather than to tell them, because
beautiful.
they're not going to take it very well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what we're worried about, right? We're worried about
Exactly.
individuals. It's true. When you talk about persuasion, there are certain persuasion is in many ways, it's like diffusing a bomb, right? Any wrong move you make has these kind of outsized consequences. And some of the things that can go wrong when you're trying to persuade people is ego threat, right? Making them feel like their ego is threatened, or they're not worthy, or they're not good enough, or implying that their group is wrong or their group is foolish, right? All these things tend to get individuals to kind of put up those defenses again, right? Rather than thinking and considering the point you're making, they turn their attention to repairing their ego or repairing their identity threat. And so we want to avoid tripping those alarms. And so it really is about figuring out what's the right approach for me to be able to kind of get invited onto this person's property rather than just barging on.
Well, just because you do all that, there's still no guarantee you're going to be invited to the property. But the thing
Definitely not.
is, but the thing is, you're in a better situation to be
Yeah.
than doing the contrary. Okay,
Yeah.
than doing the direct opposite. Also,
Yeah.
by that individual having more confidence in you, they're going to give you more responsibility, and
Mm,
with giving you more responsibility, I forgot who that quote was about. They said something about responsibility. That's putting you in a higher position. You don't
mm,
have to say it, but
mm.
you're going to be at some point. Like if you're the mentor, eventually you're going to exceed your mentor, and that's what it's
Yeah.
supposed to do. Just like if you have a coach, eventually you're going to put your coach out of work, and that's what you
Mm,
want to do, where
mm.
you excel, okay, beyond that person,
Yeah.
okay. So when you see you're taking off and you're doing these things, don't think your mentor and your coach can't see it. Okay.
Mm.
Many people are going to be happy for you, and there's going to be some people that's going to want to keep you
Pull you back.
for
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
keep these things to yourself, keep your receipts, and when it's time for you to pivot. You don't owe that person anything.
Yeah.
They did what they were supposed to do. Okay.
Mm, mm,
Move on to
mm.
higher heights. That's what you're supposed to do. When
Yeah.
it's time for you to pivot and move, you can't take everybody with you.
Mm,
People you have to leave behind in order to succeed in life.
yeah.
Have to sacrifice the few to save the many, first being yourself.
Mm. Well said.
So a lot of times when you talk about persuasion, we have to persuade ourselves that we're
Mm,
worthy,
mm.
that we're valuable.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
You have anything
And
else?
I mean, I think one of the things we didn't get to, Margaret, that I think would be really useful is talking a little bit about when you actually have an opportunity to make an argument, right? Once you get past that point where someone is resistant, right? Once you create that space where someone is willing to hear your argument, right? How do you actually make it stick? And this is where we get into some of the more fun things that I like to say about influence and persuasion, because here we talk about things like message framing And so some of people might be familiar with message framing. For anyone who's not, Margaret, the way I like to start it off is imagine that you go into a grocery store and you're in the mood for some frozen yogurt. And you go to the first aisle and you come upon the first option. It says frozen yogurt, 80% fat free. And you think to yourself, okay, that sounds pretty good, but I want to see what my other options are. So you go a little bit further down the aisle, you come upon the second option. It says frozen yogurt contains 20% fat. Which one sounds better to you? Now, you and I are both very smart people. Your audience are a bunch of very smart people. And so we quickly realize that those are the same exact thing, right? 80% fat free and 20% fat are exactly the same. But in spite of them being the same, most people can't help feeling differently when they read them, right? They feel better about 80% fat free than 20% fat. This phenomenon is known as message framing. Message framing is all about taking the same information but framing it slightly differently, emphasizing slightly different aspects of it, and thereby eliciting different responses from people. And there's a number of different ways we can reframe the same messages to change how they impact people. And if you'd like, I'm happy to go into a little detail about what some of those options are.
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So let's start with the first one, which is loss versus gain framing. Now, in order to understand this one, Margaret, I have to take a step back and help you understand loss aversion. So imagine that you're sitting on a park bench and I approach you with an opportunity for a gamble. I say, in my pocket, there's a coin. It's a fair coin, but if you don't trust me, we can use one of your coins instead. In a moment, I'm going to flip this coin. If it comes up heads, I'm going to give you $10,000 in cash. But if it comes up tails, you have to give me $10,000 in cash. Do you accept the gamble? Now, what's very interesting about this hypothetical is I see you shaking your head no. And what's interesting, Margaret, is you are similar to about 80 to 90% of people who say no thank you to this. Now, this should make you a little bit curious because if we were perfectly rational decision makers, exactly half of us should say yes, and exactly half of us should say no because it's a 50-50 chance. But because human beings are loss averse, what this means is that we experience losses as more psychologically potent as equivalent gains, right? So, although the idea of winning $10,000 feels good, it doesn't feel as good as the idea of losing $10,000 feels bad. Now, because we have this asymmetry in how we experience losses versus gains, this means that you can reframe a message and have different impacts on people. What I mean by that is if we were to go back to talking about, working with groups that are kind of, in low power positions in an organization or marginalized groups, a lot of them, when they're trying to generate change, they will say something like, look at all the things we can gain if we were to adopt this new policy or institute this new procedure. What we find is it might actually be more effective for them to say, look at all the things we're losing by not doing that. It's the same exact message, but by subtly shifting the framing, you can shift the way people respond to it. That's just one example of loss versus gain framing. And if you'd like, we can go and talk about a few more.
I don't mind.
Okay, all right. I'll do one or two more for us then. Another interesting one, Margaret, is what we can call numeric framing. This is all about how we present numbers. A lot of people think that a number is a number is a number. It shouldn't matter how I present it. But there was a study that was done a few years ago, and what they did is they gave people they said, pretend that you are on a parole board, okay? And we're going to give you information about someone that's up for parole. Half the people read that 10% of people similar to Mr. Jones will go out and commit a violent act if they're released. The other half read that 10 out of every 100 people similar to Mr. Jones will go and commit a violent act if they're released. Now you're going to notice 10% and 10 out of 100 are the same thing. They are statistically identical. But what they found is that those that read that 10% will go and commit a violent act only denied parole 21% of the time. But those that read that 10 out of every 100 people, like Mr. Jones, will go and commit a violent act, denied parole 41% of the time. We call this frequency versus probability framing. And what we find is that people are more sensitive to frequencies, whole numbers, because they're easier to visualize. It's easier to visualize 10 out of every 100 people being released, going and terrorizing a neighborhood, whereas 10% is a bit more abstract. And so, although they're the same exact figure, they tend to have different impacts on how people receive them.
Very, very interesting. Did you say
Mhm.
you had another?
I have one more. If we go, I mean, I got plenty of them, but I'll give one more before
Okay.
we go. Uh, Metaphors. Okay, metaphors are something that saturate our conversation. We use them all the time without realizing it. Case in point, I just said metaphors saturate our conversations. That was a metaphor. Okay, but the interesting thing about metaphors is that research shows if we use them deliberately, we can shift the way people think about issues. One of my favorite studies of all time was back in 2011. Thibodeau and Boroditsky gave people vignettes about crime. And they said either that crime is a beast attacking our city, or that crime is a virus infecting our city. So half read the beast metaphor and half read the virus metaphor. And they asked both groups, what should we do about crime? Now, if you were presented with the beast metaphor, you naturally ask yourself, well, what would I do about a beast? I want to cage it, I want to capture it, I want to punish it. Whereas if you received the virus metaphor, when you're asked, what should you do about crime? You naturally ask yourself, well, what would I do about a virus? I want to protect it. I want to protect people from spreading. I want to protect people from getting infected. And when they asked these two groups, what should we do about crime? They found that those that received the beast metaphor ended up becoming more likely to recommend enforcement strategies. We need more police on the streets. We need harsher penalties for criminals. Those that received the virus metaphor became more likely to recommend social reform strategies. We need to protect our people from whatever is causing crime to spread. And so, what we find here, Margaret, is the simple act of changing the metaphor you use to describe the same exact issue or same exact situation can fundamentally alter how people respond to that situation, how they go about trying to solve for it. And that's just one more example of the power of framing.
Yes, as in NLP, taking that many years ago, it has a lot of power.
Mm,
Okay,
mm,
NLP, we know that.
mm.
And reframing is very, very powerful, and so is
Yep.
association and dissociation as well.
Mm,
And the work that you bring is very, very powerful as a um, behavioral scientist, and
mm,
I appreciate the work that you do.
mm.
Um, John Robert and we met on Pod Match. Okay, he's okay. He's also on LinkedIn, and he's not on Substack. And neither case, people will be able to. I'll make sure to put your links, and people can get in contact with you at those places. And if you have a website as well, I'll make sure to include all your pertinent information on the
Yeah,
replay. Do you have any? Okay, Tig say, but I find interesting that containment and isolations were the default response to both situations, but the framing and the containment changed drastically depending on the prompting. Um, Tig has a very, very vast, very intelligent. Okay,
mm.
and he will probably connect with you, John Robert, on
I look
LinkedIn as
forward to it.
well.
I look forward to it.
Yes. Do you have any final thoughts, recommendations, or suggestions?
I think when it comes to influence and persuasion, one of the best skills that you can possibly develop is curiosity. I think that so much of our natural orientation towards trying to change people relies on this idea of trying to push them to do something, push them to think this way, or push them to see something. And what curiosity tends to do is twofold. Number one, it tends to kind of get you less about kind of making demands and more about asking questions. But what that has as a downstream consequence is it gives people more time to reflect on things that they maybe don't get a chance to reflect on. And what we find in the literature is that one of the most powerful kind of mechanisms for persuasion is a methodology known as deep canvassing. And ultimately, why they came up with deep canvassing is because they found that one of the most effective ways to institute change is to get people to think about their own thinking. And people don't do that when they're feeling defensive. People don't do that when you try to force them to do that. People only do that when you create the right space where they feel safe, they feel secure, they feel like they can trust you. And only then are they willing to interrogate these very vulnerable things of wondering, might I be wrong? And so I would urge people to consider curiosity, not just as a nice thing, but as a tool for actually driving change.
John Roberts, thank you so much. This has been heartfelt and it's been truly awesome and amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate you so much, and I'm honored to walk this journey with you.
Margaret, it was my pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. I thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you all very much. And I'll see you back later. All right. Thank you. Bye bye.